Breaking right now, Luigi Mangione admits killing Brian Thompson. I did not see this coming. And today's guilty plea changes everything. Luigi Mangione walked into federal court in Manhattan today and pleaded guilty to 2 federal stalking charges resulting in death, and admitted, in his own words, that he killed Brian Thompson. Mangione told the judge, "I knew what I was doing, and I shot Mr. Thompson in Manhattan, and he died." So after nearly 2 years of speculation, legal maneuvering, supporters, fan groups, more than $1.5 million raised for his defense, and an upcoming New York murder trial, Luigi Mangione has admitted that he killed Brian Thompson. And here's the part of the story that I find absolutely fascinating. I don't believe this was a surrender. I believe this was legal strategy, and Mangione's attorneys may have just made the single most consequential strategic move in this entire case. Let me explain. Mangione was scheduled to begin jury selection in his New York State murder trial on September 8th. I expected that trial to happen. I expected it to become one of the most watched murder trials that we've ever seen in years. In fact, just days ago, Judge Gregory Carro ordered that the jury would be anonymous because of the extraordinary attention surrounding this case. And instead, just weeks before that jury was supposed to be selected, Mangione walks into federal court first and pleads guilty. Why? Well, this is where New York law becomes extremely important. New York provides unusually broad protections against successive prosecutions. Mangione's attorneys have already argued that prosecuting him federally and then prosecuting him in New York State for conduct arising out of the same killing creates a double jeopardy problem. Until today, that argument hadn't gotten them where they needed to go. But now Mangione has actually been convicted through his federal guilty plea. And his attorneys are now expected to go back into state court and argue that New York can no longer prosecute him for Brian Thompson's murder. Now, to be very clear, Judge Carro has not dismissed the New York case yet. The Manhattan District Attorney is expected to fight this, and ultimately a judge will have to decide whether New York's double jeopardy protections actually bar the state prosecutions. But think about what may have just happened here. Luigi Mangione admitted that he killed Brian Thompson, and that admission may be the very thing that prevents New York State from ever putting him on trial for Brian Thompson's murder. That's extraordinary. And I have to believe his attorneys knew exactly what they were doing. Because look at the alternative they were facing. The evidence against Mangione is overwhelming, in my opinion. Surveillance video, DNA and fingerprint evidence described today by federal prosecutors, the alleged murder weapon, the suppressor, the notebook, his movements before and after the homicide, his alleged planning, and now, of course, we have something considerably stronger, his own admission in federal court. So if you're sitting with your defense attorneys looking at all of that evidence, the mountain of it, perhaps the question was no longer, how do we win this case? Maybe, just maybe, the question became, where am I going to spend my time? Where do I have the best options? Because Mangione now faces the possibility of spending the rest of his life in federal prison. There's no parole in the federal system. But here's another fascinating part of today's development. There was no plea agreement. Mangione pleaded guilty to both remaining federal charges without the government promising him a particular sentence. Now, the federal sentencing guidelines discussed in court reportedly contemplate approximately 292 to 365 months, roughly 24 to 30 years, although Judge Margaret Garnett can impose up to life imprisonment. Mangione is scheduled to be sentenced on December 18th. So consider now the possible strategy. Plead guilty federally, admit the killing, secure the federal conviction, then go into New York State court and argue that you can't prosecute me again for this killing. And if that succeeds, Instead of facing both a New York murder prosecution and the federal case, Mangione may have effectively chosen the federal system as the battlefield on which his ultimate punishment will be determined. And again, I cannot tell you that was the defense's motivation unless his attorneys say it was. It's pretty obvious, isn't it? But as a legal strategy, you better believe it was worth examining. And there's another part of today's hearing that should not get lost in all of this legal analysis. Brian Thompson's family was sitting in that courtroom. His wife, Paulette, was there when Mangione admitted that he shot her husband and that her husband died. For almost 2 years, so much of the attention surrounding this case has been focused on Luigi Mangione, his appearance, his background, his supporters, his court appearances, his online following, his more than $1.5 million raised for his legal defense. People have turned him into a symbol. Some have turned him into a folk hero. I've called what has developed around him a sick movement. And make no mistake, it is. And I'm curious how these supporters feel now that he just said in open court, I murdered this man. You still support him? You still want your money going to him? Maybe you'd like to buy him dinner while he's serving his life imprisonment in federal penitentiary. So now I have another question. Movement people, what happens to your movement? What happens to you people who idolized him? What happens to the fan pages? What happens to the people who have shown up outside the courthouse supporting him with your signs and posters? What happens to the people who have contributed more than $1.5 million to his defense? Do you reconsider? Or does the admission not even matter to you? Because if people continue celebrating Mangione after Mangione himself has admitted killing Brian Thompson, then I think we've learned something very important. This was never really about whether he did it or not. It's about what some people believe the killing represents. Anger at health insurance, anger at corporations, anger at wealth, anger at power, anger at the system. And that may ultimately become one of the most disturbing legacies of this entire case. Because Brian Thompson wasn't a healthcare system. He wasn't an insurance policy. He wasn't corporate America. He was a human being. He was a husband. He was a father of two. And today, the man accused of killing him stood before a federal judge and admitted that he did it. I followed this case closely from the beginning. I've reviewed the evidence. I followed the suppression hearings. I followed the extraordinary legal maneuvering in both state and federal court. And I'll tell you again, I did not see this coming. I fully expected a New York murder trial, a media circus. And instead, we may have just witnessed a remarkable piece of defense strategy in which admitting the killing could ultimately prevent the murder trial from ever taking place. Whether Judge Carro agrees with the defense's double jeopardy argument remains to be seen, and I'll be following that very closely. But today changed the Luigi Mangione case completely. I'm Mike Blangiforti, and this has been Truth, Investigations, and Criminal Behavior. Thanks for watching.